Fleeing war, poverty and persecution, 10 years ago, Europe witnessed unprecedented migration movements. They were not in the hundreds, not in the thousands, but in the millions. The unprecedented number brought the continent to shock and standstill. However, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, in what has become a historic declaration, stated that we can do it, referring to the reception and integration of those fleeing war. In 10 years, the migration movements that were met with open arms and optimism have also brought with them fear and rising walls. Let's take a look back at the events that changed the European landscape forever.
There was not enough information for people, or maybe systems were not in place.
2015. Greek coast saw boats arriving in large numbers, carrying mostly Syrians fleeing the war. They crossed from Turkey in small and dangerous vessels to enter the European Union. Their numbers climbed to over 850,000 in just a few days. Most of the people reaching Greece aimed to enter mainland Europe via the so-called Balkan route. Many chose this path in search of a better future, with Germany topping the list. Southern German cities received huge numbers within days. Most Germans, mindful of their own dark past in the Nazi era, opened their arms and homes.
In the last years, 80% of Syrians who got protection in the European Union got it in Germany and Austria. This is a story of two countries.
By the time Europe was beginning to come to terms with these events, one particular tragedy drew global attention. The death of 2-year-old Aylan Kurdi and his mother while trying to cross the Aegean Sea. The image of Aylan came to symbolize the so-called refugee crisis itself, highlighting the deadly journeys that would still claim thousands more lives in the next 10 years. 2016. We start in Germany. During New Year's celebrations in Cologne and Hamburg, thousands of women were reportedly sexually assaulted by immigrants, leaving many people outraged and angry. This year also saw the rise of the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, a far-right group reshaping the political landscape across Germany. Anti-migrant sentiments were increasing across the EU as well, especially in Italy, France, the UK and Poland.
The argument that Germany is receiving too many people, that's been central to the arguments of the AfD. And secondly, a very, very strong argument that because so many of the people who arrive are Muslims, there is a threat to the German people and identity due to the arrival of 1 million Syrians and a few 100,000 Afghans who've been given protection. So if you look at the election posters by the AfD, it's very, very, very central.
That same year, the UK voted to leave the EU during the so-called Brexit referendum as part of a campaign to take back control over its own borders. The EU, meanwhile, struck a controversial deal with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to halt departures from Turkish soil, the so-called EU-Turkey deal, worth €6 billion. 2017. Another route emerged, the Mediterranean. Lawlessness in Libya had turned the North African nation into a major departure point for migrants. Countless people from African countries facing poverty and political instability risked their lives heading across the sea to Italian ports, and many of them tragically drowned. Later on, the Atlantic became another such dangerous route. Spain's Canary Islands off the West African coast, as well as the Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla in North Africa, became major destinations for many migrants. Many relied on small and unstable dinghies in a bid to reach mainland Europe. The EU-Turkey deal seemed to work, at least partially, but migrant camps across the region soon reached capacity. Greece in particular was heavily affected by overcrowding. Meanwhile, Italy's interior minister at the time, Matteo Salvini, adopted a hard line against asylum seekers coming to his country, making landings in Italy extremely difficult. The welcoming culture had shifted to hostility. Migrants were targeted across the European bloc.
There also has been an increase in anti-migrant rhetoric by policymakers and at the higher levels that isn't necessarily anti-migrant, but an approach on migration that is much less about social inclusion and more about enforcement.
2020. The Moria migrant camp on the Greek island of Lesbos was razed to the ground in a fiery blaze. More than 13,000 people lost their shelter and basic amenities, such as access to food, water, and healthcare. The camp hosted over 4,000 children at the time, who suddenly became in need of immediate help.
It was a wake-up call for everyone that things cannot be done in such a way, that there should be a structure and there should be a proper organization of reception. And it was something that impacted the policies.
This year also saw the onset of the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. National lockdowns across the globe momentarily halted the influx of undocumented migrants. Strict rules, including social distancing and hygiene measures, would often be too difficult to adhere to in these places, while access to healthcare was severely limited as well. 2021. In an unsettling tactic, the Eastern European nation of Belarus began to sponsor large groups of migrants coming to the Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian borders. The EU claimed that migrants from Iraq and Afghanistan were deliberately being brought to the capital Minsk and were then pushed toward these EU borders to facilitate irregular crossings. Belarus has been led by authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko for 3 decades, who had apparently made the decision to send migrants from the Middle East to these EU borders in response to Belarus facing EU sanctions after a major crackdown on protesters in the country. In the same year, Afghanistan fell into the hands of the Taliban, with the Islamist regime returning to power after 2 decades. Over 3.5 million Afghans fled the country within a year, with over 100,000 of them seeking asylum in the EU.
There should be responsibility sharing among various member states. And that's why there were various mechanisms in place. But for example, resettlement, so it's been there for decades, but it was an instrument that was not used to such an extent that it would help to alleviate situations for some of the countries.
This particular year, Britain also became a major destination for migrants. Many sought to leave EU countries like France and Belgium to seek better opportunities in the UK after Brexit, knowing that from now on they would cease to see the consequences of the EU's so-called Dublin regulation, under which migrants are supposed to be sent to the EU country that they first entered. Hundreds of small boats began to depart from the French coast near Calais to cross the English Channel to the UK. These journeys are highly dangerous, and in 2021, at least 60 people died en route.
The paradox is that this is a migration, an irregular migration with smugglers, which also often is deadly. People die regularly because it's dangerous, from a safe country, France, to another safe country, the United Kingdom. So this is the most important first fact. It's not about protection. You are protected in France. France gives more protection than the United Kingdom. You are protected in the European Union.
2022. Large-scale refugee movements into the EU intensified with the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainians fled Russian attacks, settling mostly in Poland and in Germany. Europe now hosts over 5 million Ukrainian war refugees.
So they were able to enter the European Union without any extra requirements, which is, of course, not the same for people from the other countries.
The arrival and the settlement in EU member states has, in a sense, been in a regular way, but also, and obviously with its own challenges in each member state, but still there have been major efforts to try to include the people who have left Ukraine into the societies in the EU.
Meanwhile, Britain, in a bold move, decided to introduce a new law designed to send undocumented migrants to Rwanda on one-way tickets. The deal would provide funds to the Rwandan government to build migrant infrastructure, with failed asylum seekers being barred from returning to the UK for life. But the scheme faced heavy criticism from rights groups and was challenged in British and European courts. This to and fro shook up the political scene in the country. The UK saw 4 prime ministers in 2 years. The program was scrapped in 2024 when Prime Minister Keir Starmer came to power, but it had already cost over 800 million euros of British taxpayers' money before ever really taking off. 2023. Nearly 600 people died in a single massive shipwreck off the Greek coast in the summer of 2023, when an overcrowded fishing trawler with migrants from Pakistan, Syria, Egypt, and Afghanistan capsized during an attempt by the Greek Coast Guard to pull it ashore. A Frontex report suggested that some of the deaths could have been prevented. The tragedy reignited the debate over sea rescue operations. NGOs engaged in rescues at sea have repeatedly been accused of being pull factors for migrants. International law mandates sea rescue and safe harbor, but attempts have repeatedly been made to limit their operations, especially by the Italian government.
I think a lot of the sentiment amongst many NGOs is not to replace services or duties that the state should have. It's to try to address the gaps and try to show humanity. And I think a lot of the efforts by the NGOs to try to send boats to save people at sea is also stemming from this need that people have.
2024. Italy signed a migration deal with non-EU member Albania, similar to the abandoned UK-Rwanda pact. Rome built 2 facilities in Albania to house and process asylum seekers, with failed applicants to be deported back home or to a third country directly. The deal reportedly cost over 650 million euros over 5 years and was fully financed by the Italian government. However, this scheme, too, never really took off. Despite sufficiently staffing the facilities and intercepting multiple migrants at sea, Italian judges repeatedly blocked the transfers to Albania. Meanwhile, the EU approved a new asylum reform package, tightening regulations across the bloc. Slated to be fully rolled out by the end of 2026, the new pact on migration and asylum is designed to accelerate asylum procedures and strengthen border management. 2025. With Chancellor Friedrich Merz winning the German elections, Germany proceeded to close off all its national land borders. Checkpoints were established to stop undocumented migrants from entering the country, and asylum seekers presenting at the border were refused entry. Chancellor Merz pledged to keep migration below 100,000 per year, as the far-right AfD became the country's second strongest party.
Germany matters also because it is both a country to which many Ukrainians have come, 1.2 million, and the country after Austria to which the highest number of people seeking asylum have come that received protection. So in Germany, the two things have combined, and this puts it in a completely different category.
Meanwhile, in the UK, by September that year, arrivals from across the English Channel had risen to over 37,000 instances, with arrival numbers now set to break all previous records. Hoping to disincentivize channel crossings, Prime Minister Keir Starmer reached a deal whereby the British government would be allowed to send migrants back to French soil in exchange for accepting the same number of asylum seekers from France. But this so-called one-in, one-out policy is projected to remain largely ineffective.
Migration policy seems to be hardening. There seems to be more of an enforcement approach, more of a tendency to equate people who have migration status as security threats.
10 years later, Europe is not the same place. Migration policies have evolved, borders have been tightened. Like former German Chancellor Angela Merkel said, many things have indeed been achieved, but many core challenges remain across Europe.
If we want to have any policy that has an impact on this, it needs to start from a really good understanding of who is coming, why people are coming, the numbers when they are coming.
If things are done in a correct way, it's possible not even to operate with the word crisis. It's possible to manage things in a humane way, respecting your own obligation as a country, but also benefiting from the presence of migrants